Cool. We're live. So hello and welcome everyone to Quinn's third online webinar. And thank you all for joining. I'm Barry Rogers, the VP of Product at Quinn. Hopefully some of you have been using our diabetes self-management app and know a little about Quinn's mission to give power and choice to people living with diabetes. This is the third in a series of discussions we will be hosting on important subjects for people living with diabetes, from food and nutrition through diabetes decision making to mental health and how to improve well-being and choice. We hope you find them informative and interesting, supportive and motivational, and most of all novel, as we don't plan to shy away from difficult topics. We've received some great feedback from our first two webinars on understanding food myths in type 1 diabetes and handling the uncertainty of managing diabetes. If you haven't watched those yet, they are both available on our YouTube channel. And today, our topic is how to manage type 1 diabetes and not feel like a failure. We're going to dive into personal experiences of dealing with depression, suicidal thoughts, stress and anxiety, hear some expert advice on managing mental health issues, and discuss some practical tips on how to manage a sense of failure. And with us this evening, we have two fantastic, knowledgeable and experienced guests joining us today. First, we have Na-Eun Yoon, otherwise known as Jiggy. She is a Dr. Eric Thomas certified speaker and a mental performance coach, helping competitive athletes, young professionals and college students increase their longevity of their performance and demand for excellence. Her experiences and consequences of the pressure to perform bring awareness to the importance of mental health, burnout prevention and self-compassion just as deeply as she emphasizes intense work ethic, perseverance and self-discipline. She's been living with type 1 diabetes since she was a freshman in college, which we'll be hearing more about shortly. So welcome to Jiggy. And we also have Mark Lynch-Brown. He is an experienced academic coach and positive psychology practitioner with over 20 years of experience. He has a master's degree in both education and applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, and a well-developed practice where he focuses on supporting students achieve aspirational goals in a way that enhances their mental health. So welcome, and thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Wonderful. So this webinar is an interactive webinar, and we're excited to have everyone watching join in the fun. So hopefully you should all be able to see that we have an area for questions, polls and chat. Throughout the session, if you have any questions you would like Jiggy or Mark to answer, please submit them and upvote any questions you would most like answered. We'll have 10 minutes or so at the end for a Q&A, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. We'll also be holding some polls to get your opinions on a few subjects. And finally, a chat is available for you to share your thoughts, react and engage with us and each other. So let's see some hellos in the chat, and I can hear some going through already. Managing diabetes is obviously a very personal subject, and remember, it's okay for people to have different opinions. In addition, we'll be talking today about very sensitive and difficult topics that relate to failure, including mental health topics like depression and suicidal thoughts. There'll be talk of experiences, opinions, tips and techniques around mental health, some of which may feel irrelevant or ludicrous to you personally, but may provide a lifeline to somebody else watching. So let's try to keep the chat positive and supportive and avoid trolling and judgment so everyone can feel safe and supported, and hopefully we'll have some positive takeaways for everyone watching today. So with all that said, Jiggy and Mark, are you ready to go?
Bring it on.
Thank you. And so chat, are you ready for us to get started as well? Wonderful. So let's get going. And feeling like a failure is often a symptom of something larger, either external pressures such as unrealistic expectations, which are often placed on people with diabetes, or a symptom of something wider, such as anxiety or depression. And so Mark, type 1 diabetes is commonly diagnosed when people are under the age of 18, which for many is not the easiest time of life as it is. So how does depression present in younger people, and what should we look out for that separates having a tough time or feeling like you're failing to showing wider signs of depression?
Yeah, thanks Barry. Thanks for that welcome and for setting up today's webinar, and welcome everybody, and thank you for all the lovely greetings in the chat. It's a really good point. So depression needs to be distinguished from the experience of being human. And human beings have ups, human beings have downs, and particularly in adolescence, in teenage years, which is a very common time to be diagnosed with diabetes. So it can be very helpful just to try and distinguish, what are feelings of I'm feeling down now, and what are feelings of depression, which need specific attention. So when we're talking about depression, we're talking about experiencing feelings of being down over a prolonged period, or they're recurring. You just can't shake them off. It's not that you're having a bad day. It's you keep having these bad days. They keep accumulating. And the sort of things we're talking about are a feeling of hopelessness. There's nothing to look forward to. There's no point in getting out of bed. A feeling of restlessness. You find it very hard to focus on anything. Can't see the point in focusing on anything. A lack of energy. Maybe it's things you used to enjoy that you just can't see the point of doing anymore. It could be that you find that you're spending a lot more time alone. You're detaching from friends and family. Depression can often be very isolating in that way, and it becomes a vicious circle then, because that's the last thing we want people who are depressed to be experiencing. And then, of course, there are suicidal thoughts, which many people will experience. And if we see those things happening recurring over days, weeks and months, then that's when somebody really needs to access help. And would you like me to go into that now, Barry?
I think we've got some follow-up questions a bit later on that. So I might move on quickly to Jiggy. And obviously, you've been very open about your mental health, depression and suicidal thoughts. When and how did you realize that something was wrong?
I think that, growing up, I had depression, and I didn't need a doctor to tell me that I had depression. And so when I was officially diagnosed with depression senior year of college, I went in because I thought I had pneumonia. And because I couldn't get out of bed, I was so tired all the time. I was losing interest in everything, and I just felt sick. And that's why I went in. And he said that, no, it's depression. And I was like, well, I already know that. I don't need a doctor to tell me. But that was when I was officially diagnosed, but I wasn't even surprised. And it was actually sophomore year when I had attempted suicide using my diabetes supplies in my dorm room. But to be honest, even then, I didn't think that something was wrong, because at the time, mental health wasn't something that was really a hot topic. It wasn't the thing that everybody talked about. Social media wasn't really around then either. And so unless you were sort of exposed to the realm of mental health, I don't think that it was something that everybody always talked about. I didn't even know that something was wrong when my mother passed away. The only reason why I sought out a therapist was because I was at the student doctor's office picking up my diabetes supplies. I saw a poster by the water fountain that says, "Hey, are you grieving right now because somebody passed?" And I said, "I guess so." And so that's the only reason why I went to seek therapy. But again, I didn't think that something was wrong. And so I think that throughout time, I started to acknowledge what depression experience is like for me, and learning that mental health and self-compassion and self-care at the end of the day is extremely personalized. There's no one size fits all. And I don't know, I think that because I always kind of knew that I had depression, it just accumulated over time that there were ways to try to, I don't want to say figure it out, but kind of understand that it's not just me and I'm not alone in my experiences. And maybe it was when Brene Brown started talking about vulnerability and she started blowing up and her YouTube video started blowing up. Maybe it's because I started to get connected to certain books and podcasts that I really started to realize that not is it that something is wrong, but that I experienced something that I might need a little help with. And that's, I guess, something how it all started. And it honestly wasn't until like a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that I really started to take it seriously.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly challenging and tough, especially again when you've gone off to college, probably away from your family as well. And you mentioned a few steps that you've gone through there of recognizing that something was wrong and going out to reach people. How how did you find out who to reach out to, and sort of what was each of the triggers maybe at each time that sort of made you go from knowing that something was wrong to actually reaching out for more help?
I think that's a really important question, especially for me, because that's the whole point, is that I didn't know what exactly was wrong and I didn't know where to go for help. And so if I hadn't seen that poster when I was picking up my diabetes supplies that says, hey, you might want to check out therapy, I wouldn't have known what therapy was or how to seek it out. And so I think for me, it kind of happened by coincidence. Like, I saw a poster, I saw therapy. I took a class in college that showed me who Brene Brown was, or showed me what self-awareness is and what kind of books I could be reading. And from then on, when Instagram came about, I started to more intentionally search for certain people who might be talking about these topics. But yeah, for me, it started off kind of by coincidence, and it just happened to come into my reach.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And the internet and social media has obviously changed the way that we view the world, in a sense, and given us access to so much more information. And maybe just a quick follow-up, Mark, for you as well. Is this something, when you obviously work with a lot of teenagers and a lot of other people as well, is this something you hear quite a lot, that people have been sort of allowed to feel a certain way and are more likely to reach out and talk to you given something they might have seen on the internet?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And there's been a huge shift over the past 20 years in the language that's available to people. Lots of people have a language available to them now that they're familiar with, where they're able to access help. They're able to talk about, what's going on, and therefore speak to others. And that's the first step in, opening that door and being open to what's available out there. I thought that something Jiggy said, I really appreciate everything she said, actually, but I think that's something she really said, which was really important, was that there isn't a one size fits all either. There's, depression is a very far reaching, diverse experience, and it's individual to that person. And therefore, so are the treatments, and I think what's really important is you get to that point with depression and with any mental health issue where you're open to it. You accept it. Okay, this is where I am. This is what's going on with me. There's help available. I'm going to start to explore and see what that looks like. And it's in that journey of exploring these different avenues. The internet's great for that. Instagram, I know little about, apart from managing my little dog's Instagram account, but all these things are great. It means that we can see more about what's out there, and therefore take advantage of it and try different things.
Yeah, and I think the point that you've both made there is incredibly pertinent about it being not a one size fits all condition, because there obviously are so many different types of people in the world experiencing so many different cultures and other things. And so, yeah, it's really useful to hear that you might not experience necessarily all of the traditional symptoms of depression, but it doesn't mean that you aren't experiencing a form of depression. And so with that, though, I think we'll probably go on to our first poll. So the polls are anonymous, I should say, so we won't actually know what each person answers, but I've just pushed up the first poll, and we've got a question of: how often do you feel like a failure when managing diabetes? And I know this is an incredibly direct question, but again, I think the reason we are asking these questions is to understand how the community of diabetes views both themselves and those around them, and see if we can build some support networks through shared experience. So please, if you do get a chance, pop into the polls there, give it a vote, and that'll be up for the next 30 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion around those polls too. But I'll move us on to the next question, and back to you again, Mark. So in the UK, what would be your recommendations for first steps to take for anyone who is living with a feeling of failure or signs of depression or suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, the absolute first step is to communicate. So as I said, and as Jiggy spoke about, depression is an isolation illness. It cuts the individual off, and the first step is to talk to somebody. Now, hopefully you would have a close friend, you would have a family member that you could speak to. But it's a very difficult conversation to approach. Many people find that very, very hard. That first step of speaking to somebody about how they feel. They're worried about how the other person will take it. They're worried about upsetting people, worried about being judged. Lots of concerns going through their mind. So if they haven't got that person around them for whatever reason, then I would say you need to go to a doctor. When we get to the point of depression as an illness, that's the first port of call. And of course, after then, you can start to explore, many different avenues of help. But the first port of call should be the doctor.
Cool, wonderful. And Jiggy, as someone who's living in the US as well, where the healthcare system is a little bit different, so as well, given your knowledge and experience, which routes would you suggest to someone, and what is available potentially in the US for someone going through this?
Right. So before I begin, I'll just say that I am not a licensed therapist. So whatever I say, you don't have to take it personally either. It's just a suggestion, but you don't have to take it. But I think what's cool about our community, that's actually available on social media for you to see as well, is that there are therapists as well as coaches. And so there are diabetic therapists who are type 1 diabetic, and they are therapists. And so you can look those up on social media as well. And then I know there are coaches too. And I know that when it comes to type 1 diabetic coaches, it's kind of like this sensitive topic because a lot of people have different opinions about it, because a lot of the community don't believe that unless you're a licensed therapist, you shouldn't, teach people how to live with their diabetes. Or if you are not a licensed doctor of diabetes, then you shouldn't have an opinion either and teach people how to do it. So I think it's just a matter of, when it comes to coaches, just if you are interested in working with a coach, to find somebody that you align with. I personally do see value in coaches because I personally don't have the greatest experience with my own endocrinologists. So I know some people out there get a lot of support and a lot of compassion from their endocrinologist, and therefore some type of diabetics don't even need a therapist. But for me, I was never that lucky, and so I need that separate grace and compassion from a friend of mine who happens to be a coach. So if you are somebody who don't receive much support from your endocrinologist, and maybe they're rather a little bit judgmental, as most are, out of care. They care about us, but they have that passive aggressiveness sometimes. And so if you need that compassion and grace, maybe check out the diabetic therapist, maybe check out the diabetic coaches out there, but also just seek community. Our community is really approachable, I think. And so there's a lot of knowledge too. And everybody has so many different life experiences, even the hobbies that they take up, the sports is huge in our community. And we don't want you to think that you can't pursue something because of type 1 diabetes. We want to show you how to approach it with diabetes. And so I think our community involves a lot of empowerment as well. So I know I keep talking about social media, but yes, I'm a millennial, but I can't tell you to go to a meetup. We're in a pandemic and it's all closed, but if everything was open, I would say go to a meetup. But just kind of seek community. I think that's one of the most important things I've learned, because it's so easy to think that you're alone in this, but you're not.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. You hear so much negativity towards social media, but the positivity that can come through and support people in the community is really wonderful to hear. So Mark, actually, are there any tools or techniques that people can maybe practice when they are living through difficult times that you've seen help people that you've worked with? And if so, do different tools and techniques work different for different people and personality types?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's okay, I'll just explain the background of where I come from. So, psychology embraces quite a wide array of fields, and the psychology that I practice is called positive psychology, and it's relatively new. It's about 20 to 30 years old, isn't it? And it basically started because conventionally for 100 years, psychology looked at what was wrong and what was missing, and it was trying to fix what was wrong. And then positive psychology came along, and it said, okay, we're getting a good idea of what's wrong with people, but how about we start looking at what's right with people and what their individual strengths are, and then maybe how we can develop ways to grow those strengths and do it in a scientific way where we can measure it and look at what works and go with that, and then let go of things that don't work maybe. And with that, we developed these things called positive psychology interventions. The idea of a positive psychology intervention is to identify and build an individual's strengths. And the idea of building those strengths is to enable them to live a happy and purposeful life. One that I would suggest to everybody is something called gratitude. So a gratitude intervention. And gratitude is one of those things that maybe 20 years ago you would have said, well, that person's got it and that person hasn't, and that's it really. Good for them, and bad for them. And what we've learned is that if people who do feel grateful, they have all sorts of other beneficial spin-offs. So they're more optimistic, they live healthier lifestyles, they form healthier relationships, they do well at work, they earn more money, all sorts of things like that. They generally are getting to where they want to go in life. So one thing I would suggest, which is very well proven and works very well, is something called the 3 good things intervention. And at the end of each day, you find a bit of space, give yourself 5 or 10 minutes, find a nice space in your house, somewhere that's comfortable, as quiet as it could be, and just reflect over your day and think about 3 things that day that you're grateful for. And then for each one, and write these down, and for each one, write down how you contributed to it. So, for example, if it was me tonight, I'll be writing down that I was out in my garden earlier and I heard the birds singing and it was beautiful. And I stood out there for a few moments and just listened. Now, what did I do to make that happen? Clearly, I didn't make the birds sing. I didn't even feed them. So I got it for free, really. But what I did was I took myself out there and I just stopped and listened and took it in. So that was my contribution to that, And you don't write a book, you just write 3 sentences. Another thing, and you might have to just pull the plug on me here because I keep going. So another strategy that people might use is a strengths diary. So very often when people are feeling low, depressed, there's a feeling of worthlessness, I'm not good enough. When you're in that mental state, you can really see your faults, and they're magnified. You can see how terrible you are, and you lose all perspective, you lose all balance of yourself, really, and you don't become an objective observer of yourself. So what we like to do is we like to encourage people to think about their day, and this is something people could do right now, just to take a second, take a deep breath, a calm breath, and just think, where today did you use a strength? And by a strength, we mean, where were you compassionate today? Where did you think of somebody else? Where did you use resilience? Where did you find something difficult, but you did it anyway? Where did you connect with somebody? Well, everybody here is doing that right now, right? You could have all not put the computer on and watched EastEnders if you're that desperate, or maybe something even worse. But so just to stop and identify, what strengths have I used today? And again, just to write that down, and it's not a book, just 3 sentences. And to do that on a regular basis, to start to get a different perspective of ourselves. Do you want another one?
I might cut you off there, Mark. We do have limited time, but I think it's really interesting to hear some practical tips that actually everyone can start to think. I know from my research and talking to a large number of people with diabetes that the nuance of diabetes can obviously be very, very up and down. A lot can be inside and outside of your control. And so maybe, Jiggy, over to you. And so what were some of the crucial things that helped you get through your most difficult times, or things that you know now that maybe you wish you'd known then to sort of help you out?
Yeah, so what I wish I had known then and what I'm continuing to practice now, which I'm sure everybody has heard, and not to sound like a cheesy poster, but you are not defined by your numbers. And I know that that's something that a lot of us may have heard like 100 times, but I used to think it was so cheesy. But now that I really sit and think about it and I look at my numbers sometimes, and especially in 2020, I don't know about you all, but I definitely went through diabetes burnout in 2020 very heavily, to a point where I just lost all hope, all hope. And I just had to look at my numbers and just acknowledge reality. And it's not that, oh, I'm a terrible diabetic. Like I get an F in having my type 1 diabetes because of my numbers. It's like, no, Jiggy, there's a global pandemic going on right now. You had just moved to a new city and everything is closing down. A lot of things aren't just going the way that you wanted to. You're stressed about X, Y, Z. And so maybe you can work on the stress and those things. But when it comes to the number, diabetes is one of those things where you can do literally everything right and still have a bad day. And so when we acknowledge that reality as well, sometimes it's just like, take a step back. And I think a lot of the pressure and the feelings of failure that I felt came from the expectations from my endocrinologist. Really, I felt like I wanted to have the perfect number to impress her instead of doing it for myself and my own health. And so if I take that pressure away from, meeting my endocrinologist's expectations and just take time to say, no, this is supposed to be self-care. I'm taking care of my diabetes to take care of myself. And I'm doing my best. I can't judge myself because that won't help myself. And so just for me, it's a lot of self-compassion, just changing the narrative to what really is reality, what really is happening here. And, when you're going through burnout, when you might be in a depressive state, that might be harder to do. But again, just reminding ourselves that we are human. We're humans with a chronic illness that they keep saying that cinnamon can fix it, but it won't. And so just, I don't know, be very much more compassionate and have a lot of grace for yourself.
Cool.
The best that you can.
Yeah, those two wonderful set of techniques, tips, experiences there that I think hopefully some people will find useful who are watching. But we're going to move on to our second poll now. And so the question is going to be, what is the question going to be? What is the most common trigger for you feeling like a failure when managing diabetes? And we've got a few options there, but there is also another option if there is something else that you'd like to say. If you're willing to share that as well, please do type it into chat. I know this can be incredibly personal, so please don't feel any pressure to, but if you would like to share, please feel free. And whilst you're doing that, we'll move on to our next question. And so, yeah, back to you, Jiggy. You work with obviously a wide range of people in both your personal and professional life, I imagine. So do you recognize the symptoms of sort of failure and depression in others now? And how do you support others who are going through similar experiences to what you've been through?
So with that question, I will distinctively clarify that it's not that I'm diagnosing somebody in my head and just automatically assuming that's what it is and moving forward with it, because again, I'm not a licensed therapist or a psychologist for any of that matter. However, I'm more so ask more questions kind of person, and I just base things off of what they're willing to share with me. And if they are willing to receive advice, because sometimes people just share just to vent, but if they tell me that they are willing to receive advice, then I go more so in depth with my questions about more so self-awareness questions. And so it's everything that I've said combined. It can be, what is the support that you need right now? And for the people that I might work with, whether they have type 1 diabetes or not, I find myself reminding people a lot about the importance of self-compassion more than anything. And at the end of the day, when we feel like a failure, okay, it's because we are not succeeding accordingly to our own expectations. That's why we feel like a failure, because we're not succeeding. And so again, putting the humanness there, and just allowing the moment to be an experience. But just, yeah, I find myself reminding people a lot about self-compassion.
Yeah, I hear that. And so maybe Mark as well, do you have any advice on how people can support friends, family, colleagues, and other loved ones if they are currently living with depression or facing any of the challenges we've talked about today, as you mentioned earlier, trying to reach out to people?
Yeah, and I think this this theme's coming up, and it's coming up again and again because it is so essential. It's so important. And it's that theme of shared experience, of being able to talk to people who identify with what you've been through, what you're going through. And not to assume. I loved what Jiggy said there, because somebody could be talking to me and I might think I know what's going on in their head, but actually I can't be second guessing. I don't know until they say, and it's been available for people in that way, where they're able to talk to you. Some things that can help bring structure to that, because that's not easy for everybody. Some people find that difficult, and some things can give it structure and make it a little bit easier. And one of those things I would suggest to people, if you've got concerns about a friend or a family member, or you are the person who's experiencing depression, but you're not sure how to go about talking about it, is that you put time aside. And you actually do something, we would call it a nature walk, but it doesn't even have to have a formal name, really. And you actually make time to go out with somebody. You put your phone away. In an ideal world, you wouldn't even take it. Jiggy's come out in a rash because I'm talking about putting social media away for a little bit. But so no social media for that period of time. And you go for a walk somewhere. And when you're going on that walk, you make it an intention to use your senses. So to take in what's going on around you. What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you see? And then if you're the person who is concerned about another individual, you're going to have in your mind 3 or 4 questions that you might ask them. Now, one that we would always ask is, how are you feeling? But again, that's not always an easy question to answer. So other ways that you might explore that is, you might say, is there anything you've been challenged by recently? And maybe frame questions in that sort of way. What have you been experiencing recently that's made you happy? Has there been any times you've been laughing recently? And give people an opportunity to identify specific times and to process, what's going on in their life. But really, it's about just making that space for people and letting them know that you're available, you're there to connect. And again, really, the value of communities like this cannot be overestimated. I mean, I've spent 25 years in and working with people in recovery groups from addiction and alcoholism, and those people who are part of have found a community like this where they can find mutual strength from each other. Those are the people who really sort of go on to live quite healthy and happy lives and find the support they need when they really need it. So, I mean, this is great. And all the chat that's going on here is very powerful stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree on that last point as well there. And actually, given that we are sort of coming towards the end of the planned questions, we don't have too many questions at the moment from those watching. So if you do have any thoughts or any questions you'd like to ask, please do get them in fairly shortly, because we'll be moving on to the Q&A section in a second. But first, we're going to do our final poll. And so this is just following up on sort of what Mark and Jiggy have been talking about, which is, do you feel like you can reach out to friends, family, colleagues, or professionals when you are struggling with mental health challenges? As Jiggy mentioned, it's not always as easy to talk to people, especially someone like your endocrinologist, if you don't necessarily have the best relationship with them. So again, it'd be really interesting to hear from all those watching what you think about that. So let's jump on to the first question, though. So we've got one from our own Vanessa, who's the head of marketing at Quinn. And so for Jiggy, how did you determine what success was for you?
If we're talking about diabetes and not life, when it comes to type 1 diabetes, it used to be having a great A1C. It used to be having super consistent blood sugars. It used to be on my Dexcom having a really straight line. I don't have a Dexcom anymore. I'm totally MDI and I'm pricking my fingers now. It used to be perfection. Because that's just the way, excellence was always the way that I grew up. But the longer I had it, I was only diagnosed when I was 18. And so the longer I had it, the more I realized, this isn't how this one works. This isn't like getting a like passing a test. This is for life. And so when we think about longevity of things, it's like, was my method sustainable? No, I was only deteriorating myself. It was sabotaging myself. And so nowadays it's more so, right now, my standards is just having grace for myself. I don't even have expectations as to like a great blood sugar all day, every day right now, because I just don't have bandwidth for that right now. I am doing my best. And when I see a great number, I do get happy. When I hit a unicorn, I do get happy. But if I get a high blood sugar, I do get cranky. But at the end of the day, right now, my focus is how am I responding to what I'm looking at right now? Because to answer one of the poll questions, that is my trigger. My trigger is when my blood sugar is just higher and I don't know why. Probably stressed. But yeah, so right now, in this moment, my best is that I'm giving myself grace.
Cool. A wonderful answer. Thank you, Jiggy. And actually, Mark, a question for you as well that actually came from our offline community, someone who gave a question to us before the event even started. And this is for those parents and sort of guardians who are looking after children who have been diagnosed with diabetes. So often with children with diabetes, their parent or guardian will sort of assist and maybe even take over quite a lot of the duties required, because obviously young children with the dangers of insulin and everything else that's needed, it kind of requires sort of a more experienced and grown mind. But unfortunately, if your child, like Jiggy has kind of expressed, is kind of judged on their blood sugar outcomes, and those aren't necessarily going as your endocrinologist would like, it can often lead to the parents or the guardians actually feeling like they are failing their children. As someone who works very closely with sort of teenagers, and I imagine their parents as well, do you have any advice for those parents watching about not feeling like a failure when looking after your child as well?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that thing of judgment, is deeply damaging to our sense of well-being, and very unhelpful, and actually very often that judgmental voice is internal, and maybe it gets reinforced externally as well, which certainly compounds the issue. For people in that situation, anybody who's caring for a child, a teenager with type 1 diabetes, and is experiencing those that detrimental impact on their mental wealth, I would suggest again that they find an avenue to talk. Now, it depends on the age of their child as well, how you would go about that. So, with an older child, actually, here's something you could do at any age. You could sit around as a family and you could talk about family strengths, and some people have even suggested there's a lot of evidence that looking at historic family strengths is very helpful. And what happens then is you start to do it in a structured way and talk about, do you remember uncle and auntie, and they were really good at this, they used to send us a card every year, they were very thoughtful. You start to identify strengths in the family, and as you discuss these as a family, you start to bond closer. So you start to bond with your child. The child starts to bond with their parents and siblings. If there are two parents, they start to bond, and so on. And with those bonds, what we find is that, yes, everybody's going to experience those dips, especially when you have a big life event and you're managing it and it's chronic, so it's ongoing. Every human being is going to experience those dips. But what the strength of those connections does is it acts as a foundation. It supports you while you're going through it. So for those parents, I would say look for support in the family and create support in the family. That's going to support you. But I would also say find other parents who have been in that same situation. And that would be a really, really good thing, to access other parents, to speak to them, to learn from their experience. Again, that feeling of identification, it's one of the most powerful things we have as human beings, So that's going to be something I would heavily suggest. That'd be the first thing I'd go to.
Cool, wonderful. And I guess that refers back to Jiggy's point earlier about the community and reaching out to people there as well. And maybe we'll take one more question before we go to look at the polls. And so actually there's two questions from Zoe here. which are, what advice do you have to give to someone who may be struggling with hypoanxiety? And what is your best piece of advice for when you've had a tough diabetes day? So maybe over to you, Jiggy, for those.
Sure, I'm just reading her questions over again. What advice do I have to give someone who may be struggling with hypoanxiety? I don't know what other advice I have other than, I guess my question right now is to maybe clarify and let me know, like, what does struggling with hypoanxiety experience look like for you? That would help me maybe better support you. That would help me better support you. I don't do well with like vagueness, so I ask a lot of follow-up questions. Sorry, Zoe.
Cool. That's
or you can message me on Instagram.
There we go. Sorry, Jiggy has offered up her Instagram for DMs. So maybe we'll jump to the polls quickly and have a look through to see what some of your responses have been. So first question was, how often do you feel like a failure when managing diabetes? Really, as we'd expect, there's quite a wide range of responses here. So about 42% of you have responded that at least once a week you feeling like a failure when managing diabetes, and 35% are actually saying every day. So this does appear to be quite a common occurrence in the diabetes community, and I guess that's also kind of why many of you are here as well, I imagine. We've got another 15% saying at least once a month, and 8% saying rarely if ever. So again, you've got a broad spectrum of responses there. And what is the most common trigger for you feeling like a failure when managing diabetes? And so, we've got a split here as well. 37% have said unexpected blood sugars, and 37% have also said the hypos and the hypers. So I guess this again touches back onto Jiggy's point of the pressures that come around blood sugar and blood sugar outcomes, but also I guess the more immediate health effects that can have on you. We also got people responding with mental health, 9% being judged and critiqued by others is also a 9% response, and 5% say it just creeps up out of nowhere, which I can imagine is incredibly challenging as well. The final question is, do you feel like you can reach out to friends, family, colleagues, or professionals when you are struggling with mental health challenges? And again, they're pretty much even split on this one between maybe yes, whenever I need to, yes, if I really needed to, and no, I'm not sure they'd understand or help. So about 22% of you have said that, and another 8% of you have said, no, I don't feel like I can. Again, hopefully we have provided some tips today that may be helpful with that. But if not, I think this goes back to one of Mark's original points, is see if you can reach out to your doctor or a therapist, someone that may be able to professionally help you with that. These people have a huge amount of experience and education in these matters, and these people are always welcoming to people. They are there to support you. So yes, I hope that helps. But again, we've got a wide range of responses coming through from the community, as you'd expect. So maybe we'll do a few more questions before we drop off. Let's jump into the top here. So a question from Mary. They say diabetics have to make many more decisions per day than non-diabetics. And this fatigues me. How can I let my brain rest whilst not dropping the ball on my care? So maybe we'll go to you first, Jiggy, and then back to Mark afterwards.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that relates to another question here. Somebody else asked, it's like, how do you take a break from diabetes when it's literally a 24/7 thing? Yes. So there's a thing called mental fatigue and information overload, right? So when we're constantly making decisions, constantly asking so many questions throughout the day, it could be just as simple as waking up in the morning and say, oh, what's my blood sugar right now? Oh, what's going to be for breakfast? And XYZ and third. I'm not going to say, stop caring about your diabetes, but maybe you can define what taking it a little easy on yourself can look like for you. So a question that I was actually just typing on here was whether my endocrinologist supports me being MDI or me not being focused on my numbers, as I previously said. When I said I'm not focused on my numbers, I'm not saying I'm careless about my numbers. It's just that I personally don't want to obsess over it throughout the day. So I don't have a Dexcom because I was obsessed over checking it every single minute to see a straight line. I was obsessed over it. And that's why I'm trying my best not to obsess over it versus understanding that this is my way of self-care. And so when it comes to days off from diabetes, it's not that we're being careless. It's just that maybe what does it look like for you to a little bit detach yourself from the expectations of perfection. So when we detach ourselves from expectations of perfection, it's not that we're detaching ourselves from self-care. It's just that we're taking it a little bit easier. And again, whatever that looks like for you, that would be my answer.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Actually the most beautiful way that I've heard that described. And the chat obviously agrees with me with all the emojis flying through there, Jiggy. And so maybe Mark, on to you to talk about, maybe you've talked a little bit of sort of tips and techniques and ways to let your brain rest, but maybe are there any other things that maybe somebody can help sort of them relax and let their brain rest a little bit more away from all the decision making that is required for diabetes?
Yeah, something we're seeing a massive growth in over the past 10 years, even in the academic literature, is mindfulness. You know, we're seeing it's blossomed in practice, in people's everyday lives, and in the way it's been studied in academia. And I would, as soon as I heard that question, that's where my mind went. You know, this is a really good opportunity for somebody just to create some space for themselves, you know, in their day. Treat yourself. You're treating yourself well. You know, you rest every part of your body. You know, needs rest. At some point, you lie down and go asleep. But even when you're asleep, your brain is still going. It's still functioning. It's still processing the day. And this is where a habit, a discipline, a practice, a regular time put aside for mindfulness gives your brain that opportunity to just be still and just relax and not process and not worry and not have to think and work out all your life's problems or the day's problems. There are many ways to do that, many ways. I mean, it's just a very simple way that I would suggest for somebody starting out on that path, and I'm sure there are people in this chat today who are on different stages of mindfulness and meditation. A very simple way to start is to just find something to focus on. This could be an object even, you know. I'll take a leaf as an example. And what the aim of that mindfulness is to just be present. You see, fear and worry, anxiety, it lives in the future, you know, or in the past. It does not exist in the present. And the problem is our minds are dragging us all over the place and anywhere but here and now. So you find that object, something natural is great, a leaf, and you just look at it, you know, and what can you see? And just let your eyes gaze on that leaf and maybe feel it. You know, what does it feel like? What's the texture? I won't say use all your senses, don't eat it, you know, but just try and be present, you know, and use your senses to focus on that leaf. And be conscious of your breathing. You know, allow yourself just to breathe in as calm a way as you can. You know, that's not always easy when you've got a physical health issue, you know, but it's about trying to find that space and to try and do that. But as I say, there are many ways of finding mindfulness.
Cool. Another wonderful answer. So thank you there, Mark. Both Mark and Jiggy are responding to the questions through typing as well. So if you have put in a question, there are some answers appearing there. I'm going to pull out another one actually for Jiggy here. And so a question from Christine is that in terms of support, how do people feel in work? My control is a full-time job. How do you manage it?
Christine, sorry, I like to read questions too. In terms of support, how do you feel in work? My control is a full-time job. How do you manage it? I don't go to work. I have my own business, so I am constantly at work. My room is my work. In terms of support, how do you feel in work? My control is a full-time job. How do you manage it? I think this question is a matter of recognizing what is the source of your stress, what is the source of your pressure. If I am I don't know, I just feel as though my blood sugars is more so impacted by stress than work itself. And so I don't know how else to answer this question other than just mastering stress management. You don't have to master it, but just kind of like recognize what are your triggers. And I think that this question maybe applies to like anything in life. It's not just about work, but maybe about also like your relationships and everything happening outside of work as well, because literally anything can impact our blood sugars. We could be tired and we could not eat and still have it be impacting our blood sugars. So I think my first answer would be try to figure out the source of your stress first. Because if you're out of control at work, then there must be something at work that is triggering that. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jiggy. It's maybe one more question that I'll take here. And so this is a question from Sabrina that I'm going to summarize as, how do you deal with people criticizing you? As it's something that does come across a lot, and there's something that Jiggy already mentioned. So maybe over to you, Mark. Do you have any tips for when people are criticizing you, and especially people in positions of power, like your endocrinologists and doctors?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, a really real world situation for many people. And I would say that this is where we look at strength, we'd look at resilience, and building resilience. And I would say about, doing some work internally to improve our low self-esteem. And I know this has been the case for myself personally and many people I've worked with. If I have that internal narrative that is quite condemning and not very nourishing, then when I hear judgment from externally, it really taps into that, and it's got something to work with, and it really hits home. Now, very few human beings are ever going to get to the point where they completely don't hear criticism and they're not touched by it at all. That's probably unreasonable. But what we want to try and do is nourish ourselves on a daily basis, do things that are very healthy for ourselves, so that if we do hear negative judgment externally, in whatever form that comes from or whoever it comes from, we've got the internal resources, the internal resilience to not be mortally damaged by it, and that's very important when it comes to your personal health care, because in a sense it could be the person who's talking to you has a real expert knowledge medically, and you're going to have to be able to be in an emotional space where you're able to listen to that. And that's going to be very difficult if they haven't got the emotional intelligence to speak to you in a way that makes it easy for you to hear that. So that's where you have an opportunity as an individual to grow your emotional resilience so that you're not impacted by theirs, if you like, and then you're able to take advantage of the stuff you do need to hear.
Cool. And Jiggy, I'm not sure if you also want to respond to that or agree, as I saw you signing away.
Oh my gosh, I would love to answer that. First of all, if they are not diabetics who are saying that, oh my gosh, cut them off. Don't even listen to them, because what the heck do they know? It sounds like they're speaking out of privilege, to be quite honest. When it comes to others who are type 1 diabetic, who may be saying those things, because there are those out there who have a lot of opinions within our community. Again, I think whether or not they have diabetes or not, it comes down to a level of compassion. And so if they are people who don't have compassion, who don't have emotional intelligence to support you, just like Dr. Mark said, then you don't need to be aligning yourself with those kind of people, period. And this is about just life in general. It doesn't even have to be about supporting your chronic illness. If you are in a circle where people around you are speaking a language that doesn't support you, you don't need to be aligning yourself with that kind of people, with those kind of people, with that kind of circle. And so, yeah, I might be I'm a very like, don't beat around the bush kind of person. So if somebody doesn't support you, communicate that and say, that's not, what is your intention for what you're sharing right now? Because it certainly doesn't serve me. Does it make you feel better to put me down? Because it's not helping me. So what is the intention behind what you're saying? If they're purposely saying it to discourage you, then my question to you is, why are you surrounding yourself with people who are purposely putting you down? But yeah, and I also recommend everybody to read this long quote. It's called "The Man in the Arena." It basically says that no one else's opinion matters but yours, because you're the one who's putting on the performance. You're the one living that life. You're the one with a chronic illness. And so whatever other people's opinions might be, at the end of the day, just like Dr. Mark said, it's about your resilience at the end of the day.
Cool. And I think that is the perfect question to end on, and two incredible responses to go with it. So maybe, Mark, over to you. Do you have any final words or thoughts that you'd like to share about today?
Yeah, as I say, I mean, this has been great for me. I mean, it's been such a great experience. It's been great hearing Jiggy. I really appreciate you and the team putting it on, Barry. But what's been really fantastic for me is that Jiggy's been able to bring her personal experience to this, and the response has been clear from the people in this group today, you know, and the way that people have been, I've been watching it in the chat, you know, the way people have been reaching out for support and responding to each other. It's a very powerful thing. So thank you very much, everybody.
Cool, wonderful. And Jiggy, yourself, do you have any final thoughts?
I'm just really grateful for this opportunity, and it was great learning and listening from Dr. Mark. I could listen to, he like really calms me down. He has a very soothing voice. So I really appreciate being here. I do have a few more resources. I don't want to drop them here now because, you know, this is a Quintech event, but if you would like to get to know like more resources of who I'm mentioning and who I'm talking about when I say diabetic therapist here and coach there and things like that, just reach out to me, email, website, Instagram, just Google Jiggy Yoon if you have to, and I'll be happy to help.
Cool, wonderful, thank you. And you're stealing my thunder here. So thank you both for an incredibly honest and thoughtful session. This has been absolutely wonderful. And again, can we have some appreciation in the chat for Jiggy and Mark for sharing their time with us? And they've been absolutely amazing whilst doing so. Again, from me, thank you so much for joining us. And you can find out more about Mark at theacademiccoach.net. And as Jiggy mentioned, you can visit her at jiggyyoon.com or follow her on Instagram, Jiggy_Yoon, or Google her as suggested. I also highly recommend reading about Jiggy's own story, either on Beyond Type 1 or her own website if you haven't already. It's an incredible read. But yeah, if you want to find out more about Quinn, then share your thoughts on today's session. You can share with at Quinn Diabetes App on Instagram and Twitter. You can go to quintech.io for more details about Quinn and the app itself. If you're in the UK or the US, you can download Quinn from the Apple App Store now. Search for Quinn Diabetes Management. And we designed Quinn for you, so if you have thoughts or ideas on what we can improve on, please do let us know. We've worked with over 350 people in designing Quinn so far, and we would love to get that number even higher. And so finally, we'll be holding another webinar, probably around September time, so keep an eye out on the Quinn socials for more details nearer the time. But thank you all for watching and participating today. It's been another incredible session. Enjoy the rest of your days or evenings, and please download Quinn. But goodbye, and thank you all for joining again.
Bye.
Thank you.